Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, panelists, and distinguished guests. Thank you, Tom Xing, for the kind introduction and invitation to deliver this keynote address. I'm eager to speak about the net zero transition in Southeast Asia and more broadly in the Asia Pacific. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has called climate change the biggest long-term threat the world faces. The risks continue to grow. As highlighted in the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, report issued last April, the IPCC report is both a dire warning and an urgent call to action. Reducing the carbon intensity of economic activity is such an important issue, and it concerns all actors: governments, communities, businesses, investors, NGOs, nonprofits, and development partners, including the multilateral development banks, or the MDBs. These stakeholders must collaborate to accelerate the transition towards net zero. Let me begin by setting the stage. Asia and the Pacific have many of the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world, including my current home, the Philippines. Countries in the region are 4 times more likely than those in Africa and 25 more times likely than countries in Europe and North America to experience disasters. And the frequency and severity of these disasters is only increasing, destroying livelihoods, causing tens of billions of dollars in damages, and setting back economic and social development. It is almost cliche to say that the battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia, but it is true. And Southeast Asia will play a major role in this fight. Juxtaposed against the region's vulnerability is the high reliance on fossil fuels, especially coal. Coal accounts for about half of Southeast Asia's electricity generation, and fossil fuels altogether make up about 75%. Steady and robust economic growth has been a boon, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty over the decades and improving living standards. This growth is forecast to continue. But with this growth comes increased electricity demand and more activity in greenhouse gas emitting sectors such as transportation, agriculture, and industry. It is imperative to set up efforts to green the region's economies and to get to net zero by 2050 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 8 of Southeast Asia's 10 countries have pledged to achieve net zero by 2050, in line with the 1.5 degree scenario. Indonesia's current target is for 2060, and the Philippines has not made a commitment yet. We need to see more ambitious commitments, especially from Indonesia and the Philippines. But the commitments are not enough. There has to be follow-through and credible roadmaps to guide implementation and align incentives. Pledges must be formalized in policy documents, codified in law, and then integrated into legal, regulatory, and policy frameworks. A few countries, like Vietnam and Thailand, has taken positive steps recently. Both submitted the second updates to their Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, last November. Thailand advanced its target for carbon neutrality from 2065 to 2050 and announced more ambitious mitigation targets. Vietnam also increased its mitigation targets, and in July 2022 approved a national climate change strategy. At the G20 summit in Bali in November, Indonesia and a group of international partners, jointly led by the United States and Japan, announced a Just Energy Transition Partnership, or we call it JETP. The JETP seeks to mobilize an initial $20 billion in financing to help phase out coal and invest in renewable energy, with the goal of reaching net zero in the power sector by 2050. While these efforts still need to go further to be 1.5 degree aligned, It is important to recognize and applaud such progress. These steps signify that there is political will to address the climate change. However, governments cannot do it alone. They need financial, policy, technical help from partners like the MDBs. The Asian Development Bank, where I represent the United States on the board of directors, and the sister MDBs have the mandate, the resources, the convening power, and the expertise required to support mitigation and adaptation activities. ADB, under the strong leadership of President Masa Asakawa, is positioning itself as the region's climate bank. At COP26, ADB increases climate finance commitment from 80 billion to 100 billion over the period 2019 to 2030. A third of this will finance adaptation, and 2/3 will go towards mitigation. ADB is also fully committed to aligning its financing flows with the Paris Agreement. By July of this year, all sovereign operations will be aligned, and the target for full alignment of non-sovereign operations is in 2025. This means that all ADB investments will be consistent with development pathways that are compatible with the targets of the Paris Agreement. The ambition to be a climate bank extends well beyond this. I am proud that ADB is one of the most innovative institutions in the global development architecture. ADB is not just coming up with new and creative ideas, it is putting them into practice. For example, ADB and ASEAN governments established the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, or the ACGF, in 2019. ACGF accelerates the development of green infrastructure in ASEAN by providing technical assistance to identify and prepare bankable green infrastructure projects, as well as the financing to meet initial capital expenditure costs. Just 60 million in financing from ACGF's parent fund, the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund has mobilized another 1.8 billion from ADB and 505 million from other co-financing partners across 5 projects. ACGF is also helping scale up the issuance of green, social, sustainable, and other labeled bonds, or GSS plus bonds, in Southeast Asia. The bonds serve as an important conduit for countries to access capital from global investors interested in thematic bonds. ADB itself is an active issuer in these bond markets. Since 2015, ADB has raised about 10 billion in green bonds. In 2021, the bank successfully raised about 300 million in blue bonds to support ocean-related projects in Asia and the Pacific. ADB is also leading the way in accelerating the phase-out of coal-fired power plants. There is a growing recognition that it is not enough to simply halt the construction of new plants. We also need to incentivize the early retirement of existing, unabated coal plants, some of which have 40 years or longer of remaining operational life. In Southeast Asia in particular, the coal fleet is very young, with many plants having come online in the last 10 or 15 years. To respond to this challenge, ADB announced the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, at COP26 in partnership from Indonesia and the Philippines. The ETM is a pilot that uses blended finance structures to facilitate early retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants to replace those electricity sources with renewable generation. ADB and the Indonesian partners recently reached a major milestone with the signing of an MOU to lay the groundwork for what would potentially be the first ETM transaction. This transaction would accelerate the retirement of Cirebon 1, a 660 megawatt coal-fired power plant in West Java. The ETM involves donor countries, financial institutions, and philanthropies. It is designed to be replicable and scalable there are feasibilities and pre-feasibility studies at various stages of progress in other countries, as diverse as the Philippines, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Kazakhstan. I'm very excited to see this initiative unfold. The Paris Agreement is clear on the importance of a just transition. The idea that costs and benefits of the net zero transition are fairly distributed and at-risk communities receive the support they need. ADB will integrate a comprehensive approach to just transition with the ETM that provides support for affected workers, communities, and regions. ADB and Indonesian partners will assess and anticipate negative impacts, design a plan, and implement mitigation measures in line with a commitment to ensuring that benefits are shared equitably and no one is left behind. ADB's strong commitment to a just transition is not just limited to ETM. It is also reflected in key documents such as the bank's 2021 energy policy. The net zero transition can be a powerful driver of growth and sustainable development. But climate goals should also be viewed in the context of social and economic development. ADB is working closely with our member countries and with other stakeholders to develop financing and policy strategies that ensure communities share in the benefits from the shift to low-carbon, resilient economies. At COP27, ADB launched the Just Transition Support Platform. This multi-sector technical assistance platform provides support to build capacity of ADB's member countries to strategically plan, implement, and finance just transition, to manage any negative impacts, and to increase benefits from the transition to net zero. Specific areas include, but not limited to, green skills, job programs, strengthening social protection and health systems, and creating economic opportunities for women and the vulnerable. Lastly, ADB and 7 other MDBs have jointly agreed to a high-level principles for just transition that provides direction on the aims, approach, scope, scale, outcomes, and processes associated with a just transition. These principles provide clarity around how MDBs approach the social dimensions around transition to net zero and lay the basis for collaboration for other stakeholders. With that, allow me to conclude my remarks. Thank you.